All right, hey, well, welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the previous episodes that we've had over what is going on in the European continent, in the lead up to, American involvement, would you say? We talked a lot about Europe with the British, with the French, the Germans, the Russians.
Well, that's how we ended with the invasion of Russia, which is everything else in the war is a sideshow.
Right.
Honestly speaking, size-wise especially.
Sure.
The numbers on both sides, millions and millions of men on both sides,
And
thousands of tanks.
Again, we mentioned with the statistics of the number of the German troops that moved onto the border in the far eastern section of their territory. And again, it's like they were never even there. You know, the Russians never knew it, which is very surprising. But we're now going to switch focus here. We're going to start looking at a little bit of the Asiatic or the Pacific theater of the war buildup.
So you're going to bring me back up to speed. It's been several
it's been
episodes
yes,
since
it has.
anything with Japan.
So what we find here, and you'll see here on the map, this is as best you can anyway, some color-coded areas of how Japan really expanded into the rest of their region. The thing you got to keep in mind, of course, Japan is an island nation, you know, or an archipelago if you really want to get technical, a group of islands rather than just the one big.
Yes.
But the idea is, again, they are not rich in natural resources.
No, in fact, probably one of the weakest of the great powers.
And again, the great powers after World War One.
World War One.
Yes,
I mean, they were technically a great power before World War One, but
Right.
nobody paid attention.
Right. Well, I mean, they were thousands of miles away from the United States. They were a whole continent away from anyone in Europe that really cared. And well, beyond that idea of happening in 1903, 1904?
1905, the Battle of
There we go.
Tsushima Straits, where they defeat the Russians.
That's right, with that Russo-Japanese war that ultimately ended in failure for the Russians.
You know, on every possible front.
But again, that's where they really start to expand. As early as that 1905 turn of the 20th century.
What is it? Oh, Taiwan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
1895,
Right.
they take Taiwan. So that's just kind of of course, it's the Far East in the 1800s. Who's paying attention? Nobody.
Well, and again, you have by the mid 1860s, 1870s, soon after the American Civil War, the United States is really opening its trade relations with these people. And one great thing that we do see is, of course, industrialization. We're in our expansion. We are in our industrial revolution hitting about that time, 1860s, 1870s. Well, where do we need to go? We need to go somewhere to unload all of the crap that we have made. And of course, it's for some reason a parallel universe. So Japan and China are the ones that we go for.
Right. Japan not quite as much because they're still really isolationist.
They are.
But when we look at China, even then, China is like, the U.S. is looking at it like the NBA looks at China today. They just start drooling when they think of about 1 billion people buying jerseys.
Right.
And we're the same way. They don't have much in the way of industry, so anything finished goods, we can trade them for iron and coal and all those other things. We have a lot of it, but we can make it even cheaper.
Right. And so again, that's one of the main reasons why Japan does look towards their neighbors to the south and the west. Speaking specifically here, when they've now taken Korea by about the 19-teens, they have finished taking over the rest of the peninsula of Korea and then moved into now mainland China. They start inching away at the top portions of China, right there at the border of North Korea today, the Yalu River. But then you'll see here at the end of World War I, there's some quite interesting pieces here taken over from the Germans. Yep.
There we go.
The island of Yap. And
trying to do everything backwards.
Right. The island of Yap and Palau, right there in the South Pacific. It does make it a little a little more of an expansion for them. And the thing again is they're looking for resources. Japan, they realize, oh crud, if we want to be a major player in the game, we got to go and get iron ore. We got to go and get oil. We got to go and do
Especially
something in order to become now a bigger player in the market.
Oh yeah, they're very well aware of their weaknesses.
Oh yes.
And oil is an Achilles heel for them. There's just not that much oil in that whole region.
No.
All northern China, even after they take Manchuria, they just don't get oil. They get iron and coal like crazy, but
Well, that works, but no oil
No
to
oil.
run your machines.
oil
or
is
your
farther
ships.
south. You have to get down into the Dutch East Indies.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, because they're not Indonesia yet.
That's true. And so,
yeah.
you know, and again, the idea, of course, this understanding of taking much of mainland China, and you'll notice some of the color coding. They take Manchuria up there in 1905 to begin, and then by 32, 33, they really start to clamp down and take over much of that northern portion. And so moving then through into Peking, and then down into the central coast of here, China, where this again is not your naval powers of what we think of Japan in the sense of World War II.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
This-
This is all ground pounders. I
Right.
mean, yeah, they take boats to get there, but then
Yeah.
then they're on ground and they
Right.
do their ground thing.
Well, and like you mentioned on in the beginning off camera, 2-3 million troops
Yeah.
in China, mainland China, Japanese occupation. That's a massive amount.
It's a huge army, but it's almost exclusively infantry.
Mm-hmm.
Some armor, very little armor. And it's not very good armor, as we find out in 39, was it 39? Khalkhin Gol, when they fight the Soviets, and they run into some of those Soviet tanks who, the armor's just too thick for the guns the Japanese use. And so they several, tens of thousands of casualties. We're talking a big battle.
I'm sure.
Led by a kind of a funny sounding guy named Georgy Zhukov. We'll hear about him a lot later.
Zhukov?
Yeah, he's the
Yeah.
guy who beats the Japanese, which is why when we turn west into the battle, when we talk about the Soviet Union, he gets to the top of the list because he's definitely caught Stalin's eye.
Well, there you go. If you're especially you're battling against one of your, well, at this time they're not really a main rival, but they're close.
They can make things difficult for Russia or Soviet
Sure,
Union.
sure.
Very much so, because that is the end of the long supply line.
Right. I mean,
You know,
you're
in-
literally
In a lot of places, a single track running east and west.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's vulnerable for 2,000 miles.
Well,
to
yeah.
raiders, anything else, and there's no way you can patrol that. That's just
No.
insane.
No, of course
So
not.
the Soviets smack them on the nose,
Mm-hmm.
and so the Japanese once again look south,
Of course.
and then they take that big chunk of around Peking and Shanghai,
Down
and
into
then
Hong
into
Kong.
Nanking,
Right.
1937.
Right, which was
Nanking.
considered the rape of Nanking, where it really does start to. That is the moment when we start to open eyes to the far east.
Yeah, because that one hits the newsreels.
It does. You start to see some of the pictures. You have foreign correspondents in there showing the gruesome images of these individuals who have just been massacred.
I mean, babies bayoneted. We don't even have to get into the weird stuff that the Allies claimed that the Germans did in Belgium.
No.
This is on tape. This has
Right.
got eyewitness accounts that's in newspapers all over, especially the West Coast.
Yes, of course.
And it really riles Americans up. They're ready to go to war. But it fades pretty quick. I mean, we don't have that much. Even then, even before the internet and TV, we didn't have long attention span.
It is
Because
contrary to popular belief. I mean,
4,000 miles away.
yeah, right. Exactly.
Does
You
it
know,
really
and
affect us?
and again, China's still that third world country. You know, they don't have the technology advances like they do today. They're surely not one of those that we're like, oh, hey, let's go and win a war to save China.
Yeah, I'll get to it later.
Exactly. You know, there's bigger fish to fry because you still see.
But of course, that later period, the 1800s, early 1900s, isn't that when Pearl S. Buck wrote her The Good Earth? talking about being in China that was so popular.
Yeah.
I mean, it was still reading when I went to school in the 70s. That was something they recommended on reading lists because it was, eye-opening.
Right.
It was about some place you never knew it about. But
well, and again, it was the Orient for so long. That mysterious Orient.
Yes, the inscrutable Oriental.
Right, and nobody knew exactly what was over there.
Right.
Nor did they really care so much.
Right. It's, like I said with Dan King, everybody's up in arms. It's just wrong. It's brutal. It's just against everything we would think of.
Well, sure.
As Americans. But we don't have any interest really in China. We have some trading going on, but it's not a lot. The Chinese population in America is still really small.
You're right.
And so it's not like you got every third person has a cousin that's Chinese.
Well, and again,
it's just not going to happen.
Looking at it in terms of a political and social standpoint, we've had the Chinese Exclusion Act that was put into play all the way back in the 1880s, and then it intensified in the 1920s, and then of course re-intensified in the early 1930s because we don't need
labor.
We don't need more and more people at the height of our depression where we can't even keep our own people employed. Why are we going to allow more people from an Asiatic country?
When I feel depressed, I don't want company.
No.
Let alone people are going to stay.
Oh, heck no.
But yes, to the extent that we care about China, it's really more keeping them out because like all other immigrants, not against immigrants, but just it's a fact of immigration. When there's high levels of immigration, wages stagnate.
Right.
And when wages stagnate, people start feeling like they're falling behind.
And it's true.
And it is technically true that their wages, if you have even 1 or 2% inflation after 10 years, you're not making that much money anymore.
Right.
Your wages didn't go up because there's this influx, especially if you're on the lower end of the spectrum.
Right.
Which, of course, where the Irish,
the Italian,
blacks still.
Right.
The Italians, the Greeks, the Southern Europeans that come in at the turn of the century. It's a lot. And so there's always this political, we're built on immigration. I think everybody in every generation has recognized that this is how we were built.
Right.
Europeans did just pop up in Kansas City, Missouri.
That'd be weird
So
if they did.
they came on the Mayflower, and they came to Jamestown. They came to all those places, but like we talked about in our slavery series, the other.
Right.
They don't look like me.
Right.
They don't go to my church.
Right.
They don't talk like me.
Right.
And they're taking my job, or at least the way I see it, they're taking my job.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be true. It has to be perceived. Politics is about perception.
Which again leads to the idea that of why we don't really mess with the Pacific much prior to really 1940.
Well, I mean, to the extent we did was during our phase where we had to do our social Darwinism and prove that we were a great power.
Right.
And, Teddy and McKinley lead us over into the locations. We get the Philippines.
We've got
Guam.
Midway. We've got Guam. We've got the Marshall Islands. We've got the Caroline Islands. We've got a few islands out there in the middle of the Pacific during that American expansion, American imperialism.
Most of them are rocks.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, the island of Midway is more like a coral reef that is just maybe about 2 miles by 1.5 miles.
It's small. I know that.
And most of that is like literally underwater coral reef, and then you have just the airstrip and water tower.
And that's all you have to take the coal and put it on the island so you can coal ships. It's not like it's waiting there for you.
Right.
So, Wake Island is the same way. Guam isn't much different, except it has a decent port.
But again, that's all you really have until you get to the Philippines.
Which the jewel of the Orient.
Yes, that's the way to
Manila
go.
is an amazing harbor.
Oh, yes. And I mean, the amount of resources that you can get out of the Philippines.
Well, yeah, just the population.
There's
the resources again.
Well, they have rubber there, right?
Some rubber, but bamboo and other woods.
Right.
So it's not just like they're planting bamboo for us, but it's raw materials.
Yes,
again.
of course.
Again, they don't have a developed industrial base or anything. We're not buying widgets from them.
But we are ready to go and make them at least a trade partner.
We will sell them widgets.
Exactly.
At a discounted price.
Of maybe
whatever you can afford.
Exactly. And so again, when we do see more of that Japanese expansion, when it's getting closer to about that 1937, 1938 time period, that's when things start to get a little iffy for us.
Like you said, Rape of Nanking was an eye-opener.
Right.
The public lost interest fairly quickly.
Correct.
Probably within a month, most people couldn't tell you where Nanking was.
Exactly.
Who's Nan and why is she a king? Nan should be a queen.
Anna and the king?
Maybe
What?
that's it. Yeah.
There you go.
But in the Navy especially.
Oh, yes.
Their eyes get open. These people, what happens when they finish China off? Where are they going to turn? There's nothing to the west. Western China is just nothing. I mean,
you got
desert.
I was going
The
to say,
Gobi
you got the Gobi Desert.
and the Tibetan Plateau.
No, thank you.
Unless you're short of monks, you really don't get much out of Tibet.
Yeah, probably not.
It's not even a real resource base.
No.
So, I'm thinking the naval staff is looking at this and they're like, that's a direct threat to the Philippines.
Exactly.
Which is our jewel.
Yes.
And so we need to start looking at them as a serious threat.
Well, and again, you got to think about it as well. They have already, by 37, 38, had inched their way down into what is now French Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. And they are knocking down the door of those French Indochina allies, because of course they're owned by the French and for the better part of the mid 1800s all the way until 1954 that is.
Yes.
So again, we as an ally to these people are thinking, crud, if they take French Indochina, like you just mentioned, where are they going to go next? Well,
I mean, obviously, in a lot of ways, we're not going to care if they take British Malaya or the Dutch East Indies. Because, again, we're not real big fans of imperialism. Despite the fact we got the Philippines.
Exactly.
Don't look at that.
Hey,
don't look.
We don't care. That's our thing.
But we're not these global empires.
No.
We're just not, that's not our thinking. Even with colonies, so to speak.
Yeah.
We don't consider ourselves an empire, and we're not very good at it.
No, we're not.
But when we look at the British and we look at the Dutch, who are all over the place, and they're like, you can't even find Netherlands on a map of any. You have to zoom in to find them.
Exactly.
Otherwise, they're a dot.
Right.
And so it's like, why should they own in what becomes Indonesia? These huge islands full of people. So we're not real concerned whether they lose that or not. That's not a big factor for us. But there's no way they're going in here without going here.
Right.
It just seems like a logical course. And we're already struggling in this area with rights of passage issues with the Japanese.
Sure.
They're not real friendly to U.S. merchants coming into the coast like Hong Kong, which isn't theirs, it's still British.
Right.
And into the southern parts like Amoy down here, that's still Chinese till 1940 or so. They're not very happy with us trading, but then again, we're Americans, we'll sell you anything.
Right.
That's what we do.
Doesn't matter, we'll do what we can.
And so, the Navy especially is looking at this from definitely a different perspective than politicians or American citizens.
But again, they're more. Again, that is an actual threat to the Navy.
Yes, exactly. They have a couple fleets. They're not very large, but
people
significantly a number of vessels that stay in the Far East.
And again, if you're sitting cozy in Washington, D.C., well, what does it matter in the Far East?
Yeah, 8,000 miles away.
What does it matter? But if you're maybe a Californian, or you're an Oregonian, or a Washingtonian, then you're thinking, maybe that's a little bit of a different story, because that's trading.
Yes. You're aware that the boats leave Seattle, and San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and Long Beach. and
Yes.
go somewhere. And
Right.
a lot of times those are places that are oriental,
Right.
to the east. Yeah, but, well, in the meantime though, I mean, that kind of, I think, brings us up to speed on Japan's activities. They've conquered a good chunk of China, and they're kind of poised, they're kind of overbalanced almost.
Yeah.
That they're gonna have to keep going.
Well, I mean, they've taken most all the land that they can take.
Well, and I know after Nanking,
Mhm.
we stopped selling them scrap iron,
Okay.
and we stopped selling them aviation fuel,
Well, there you go.
which of course did not make them happy.
Oh, well,
That was our first embargo.
Those embargoes, of course, which is interesting. We talked about this a couple of days ago.
Mhm.
This is one of the first embargoes that we start to see as a prevention method, in a way. Of
To a
keeping
certain,
them.
well, not just to, I guess, we want them to do something backwards, I guess.
Yeah.
Most embargoes were done to prevent people from doing things, like the British when they embargoed Europe under Napoleon.
Right.
It was
right.
to prevent him from trading. It was technically a blockade as well, but whatever.
Either way.
But for the United States, this is a switch in thinking of embargoes. We're going to try to embargo them to make them pull out of Indochina.
Yeah.
Well, that's never been done before. Nobody's ever tried this kind of diplomacy. And obviously, the Japanese don't take it very well.
I can honestly.
So, but what's going on in America? We know we got our eyes open.
Yeah, definitely got our eyes open, and especially what's going on here in the United States is again, we do not. Let's see, we are not ones to really back down so much as to say, okay, we're going to we're gonna recognize what's going on in China, we're gonna recognize what's going on in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But we still got to keep ourselves in check. We're in the Depression, still going on in the Depression.
Oh yeah.
We don't really have much of a say in what
In fact,
goes.
But 37 is we kind of have that second dip.
We do have that second dip by about that second wave of the New Deal legislation hitting, and then it kind of just it falls to pieces. You know, the CCC, the TVA, the AAA, they kind of just go kaput. And so we finally do see some of this change in our politics. And the United States definitely says, okay, hey, we're gonna throw some good things towards the Europeans. And we're gonna keep it
The good guys.
Yes, we're gonna keep it European. You know, we start to have now the Neutrality Acts of
Really,
19
like 2 or 3 of
We
those.
had 3 of them. We had
Wow.
one in 36. We had another one, 35, 36, and 37.
Wow, we were just really adamant about that neutrality
Well,
thing.
again, keep in mind the times.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're in the height. I mean, the Depression, to me, is like 31 through 39 are just bad,
Well, sure.
without any real up.
Yeah. And so again, once you have again the election of 32, Roosevelt comes in, makes all these wonderful grand changes. We really have no dog in the fight in Europe when Hitler's
Doing his thing.
rampaging through his whole
His little, I'm going to just
Yeah.
take one more thing.
right. And so by then, again, 34, 35, that's a big campaign time for Roosevelt. You know, he doesn't want to lose. He doesn't want to be the guy who says, "Well, I'm gonna keep us neutral," and then, you know, not do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So he continues. Again, we're in this era of our history that we can't get into a fight. We can't get, because we don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower, we don't have anything really that's a benefit for us. Plus, France, Great Britain, they've already kind of appeased.
Well,
most
yeah,
of
by
Hitler.
39. Well, 37, it's just getting going now.
Well, sure, but
And the interesting thing is we do have the resources because Yamamoto is over here going to school. And he sees how much industrial potential that we have, but we don't see ourselves as a world power. Not as a
global
colossus of any sort. Yeah, we're good and we're strong, but we're we're not really concerned because that's not what we want to do.
But again, we also think about it this way: we are within, we're in a good spot in our location as well. You know, we've got the Atlantic to our east, we've got the Pacific to our west.
Yeah.
I mean, the closest we would ever be would be what? Maybe, if you think about it, we're 2,000 miles away from Europe.
Yeah.
We're roughly about 4
or
5,000 from the Asian issue, you know. So we're sitting in a good spot. Yes, we do have the idea that, hey, you know, we did win some good battles. We had some good progress in the 1890s, early 1900s, but that was then. This is now.
And we haven't expanded. We've already given away things like Cuba.
Right.
And a lot of those little islands are, well, they're just spots, the New Hebrides, Samoa.
Mm-hmm.
They're not that important to us because they don't really provide anything to us unless you want to go on a vacation. And there's not a lot to draw you there because they're not resorts at this point. Yeah, if you want to rough it and get bit by mosquitoes,
no, thank you.
There, or like that one island that's full of crabs.
Oh yeah, and definitely not the good kind that you would think of Joe's Crab Shack.
yeah, not the good kind.
But again, we're trying to just keep ourselves afloat by this time, so we keep those neutrality acts of 35, 36, 37. But again, keep in mind,
what do they really say? What do they tell?
Well,
I mean, obviously, we're going to be neutral. What does it really do?
What the neutrality acts say is, again, we're going to prohibit the sale of arms to anyone who is a warring nation, except our allies. Okay. Okay. And so again, we are going to continue to, in a manner of speaking, like the French, like the British, because, well, they're our buddies.
Yeah, they were our allies, but we don't like the idea of long-term entanglements overseas.
Oh, of course not. Of course not. This is very similar to what we see after World War I, you know, with the rejection of the League of Nations. Mm-hmm. We see, again, there's learning from the issue of World War I. We don't loan out a lot of money. You know, in World War I, we loaned out almost $10 billion.
Which is a lot of money when you look at it today.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we didn't want to have another problem like that happen. And again, so we say, okay, you're at war, we're done. We're not even going to talk to you. We're not going to deal with you. We're not going to do anything with that. And of course, again, learning from World War I with the sinking of the Lusitania, the unrestricted submarine warfare, and Germany having a lot of those subs, especially along the Atlantic coastline and especially around France and into the North Sea in a way, we say, okay, we're not going to allow anyone on a foreign vessel who is at war either.
So you can't take a British. You couldn't take the Titanic, which is already underwater.
Yes, of course, but
its sister ship. You couldn't take that to England.
No, you couldn't take a French. You couldn't take a British. You couldn't take
or German.
Or German.
Matter, yeah.
I mean, yes, Germany probably still had freightliners coming into the New York Harbor or wherever.
Probably.
But again, if you wanted to take a ship, it had to be American. I don't know how many American ships that would be taking passengers over to Europe, but there might have been.
I mean, it's hard to imagine today because we hardly have any ships.
Sure.
But we were a huge naval power, commercially speaking.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was plenty of, not necessarily cruise lines, but passenger ships going both ways.
Right. Okay.
Going to Ireland and coming home.
Yeah, good point.
Go pick up our cousins and
the O'Malleys.
Yeah.
Radar. Yeah. O'Reilly.
Yeah. Sure.
So the other part of this Neutrality Act is, of course, by 39, we see again, September of 39, war starts, boom, we shut down. Mm-hmm. We're not getting involved because we're, again, staying neutral.
Right.
We don't care to be a part of this war because, again, war in our eyes was a bad thing. People died. There wasn't much of a benefit for us at that time.
That's because nobody could do the taxes.
Right. What we do have, however, is a little thing called the cash and carry program.
Okay.
With the cash and carry program, it's literally like COD. I know younger viewers probably do not know what a COD is.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore.
And of course, you can't go and get a COD, which is cash on delivery.
Right.
Meaning that you call, like, again, you call QVC or you call up Amazon and say, hey, I want to order this product. And when they deliver that product to your home, then you make the transaction.
Right, so like your ups guy would be sitting there with his hand out,
Exactly.
waiting for the check before you got your.
Right. It's a
Your cool
you give
things.
me your money, I give you your package. The cash and carry program is very similar to that.
Okay, so basically, if the British want guns, they have to come and pay money for guns.
Correct. And that's a good thing because we're not taking our risk of bringing ships over into Atlantic waters, into European shores, and saying, here you go, Britain, here's some weapons, here's some ammunition, here's supplies, keep your war going.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking ourselves out of the situation.
Plus, we're bankrolling ourselves. And despite the fact that I don't know that we realized at the time, we're putting the final nail in the coffin to what was known as the British Empire.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, but again, that idea of us taking ourselves and staying, I hate to use this word isolationist because we weren't technically isolation. We were
Non-interventionist.
No, there
We
you
were
go.
not going to intervene in the other
Right,
war.
that's a good idea.
And we didn't want to be put in a position where we had to.
No,
Like a
exactly.
Lusitania.
Right, like a Lusitania, or even going in and having a lot of that issue of if we get involved, if we get into the war, like what we saw with the Zimmerman note at the beginning of World War I. You know, hey, you know what? We're gonna take ourselves out of the equation. So we're not gonna get into the war in any capacity. It is what it is. So again, by the time of,
But we know war's coming.
Yes, it is.
Especially, I don't know, I'd say probably by the end of 37, Roosevelt is already convinced that we will have to go to war.
You got to realize, of course, with the expansion in Europe of Hitler,
Especially after 38.
yes, with him
With
taking
Czechoslovakia,
Czechoslovakia, taking Austria, taking over what he thinks is his final move,
Yes.
it doesn't work. Again, Roosevelt, he's a politician, but he's not dumb.
No. And he is an internationalist,
He is definitely
for lack
that.
of a better term.
He reads the newspapers on a regular basis. He understands. He's gotten constant contact with the British Prime Minister, the French, at that time, what would be the
Premier.
Prime Minister? Yeah, the Premier. And so again, we know something is going on. We see the writing on the walls. We see the sun is rising over the horizon, and not the sun of Japan, but
Right.
funny pun there. But the idea, of course, is we must prepare. We must get somewhat of a preparation. Now, we're sticking to our guns of neutrality. 1939, again, getting ready for that new election, and an unprecedented 1940 election where we see Roosevelt running for his third presidential election in a row. Never to be done before, never to be done since. But again, he starts to say,
Cost him about 10% of his vote.
yeah,
In 36, he won about 61%.
in 40 he
He
won.
about 54.5%.
So it wasn't a complete landslide victory for him.
No, it was definitely showed that there were a lot of people that were concerned with this break from precedence.
Well, and he was becoming more of that social dictator.
Yeah, everybody liked him, but what's the difference between a guy who always gets reelected and a dictator?
Exactly.
Hmm.
Right.
We assume the voluntary nature of it, but we'll talk about that when we get to the end of the war with Harry.
Right. And so what we do see, again, with that preparation of the war, again, by 37, 38, Roosevelt, he sees the writing on the walls. He realizes we do not want another World War I. Prior to World War I, we didn't have troops that were ready. We didn't have troops that were...
It took us, 6-7 months to get anybody over there, really?
Exactly, because you had to train the troops. First of all, you had to have the draft. Second of all, you had to make sure you get your troops ready to go. Takes maybe, a month and a half, 2 months for them to actually be prepared.
Well, and for a good chunk of the war, we were fighting with French rifles and artillery.
Exactly.
Because we didn't have any of our own.
Exactly.
And he wants to avoid that again.
Exactly. And of course, the French rifles really aren't that good.
No, the little artillery piece, the 76s were pretty awesome, but whatever.
Their automatic machine gun was kind of crap.
Well, but that's where Browning came and saved us.
Yep. So what we do see again is it's a new piece of legislation. It's now the Selective Service Act. And for anyone who was, at this time, 18 years old, you had to sign up for the draft.
Right.
Okay, it's very similar to what we have today, but I think if I remember correctly, the cap today is what, 32?
40.
Was it 40 for the cap?
18 to 40.
Okay.
But I mean, at this point, anybody who's anybody, unless you're an immigrant who becomes a citizen,
Right.
You've already signed up before because you can't go to college.
Exactly.
I mean, well, you can't borrow money anyway.
No.
You can go to college as long as you don't get any government money.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that get closed to you if you don't sign up for a selective service.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't draft anybody who's not 21,
Right.
at least not till later.
Not until later. And now
Way
again,
later.
that's way later. But as you'll see, it's just a preparation. It's a preparation time to just, okay, we've got this pool of individuals that we could take in this draft if we need it. Not saying we will, and surely...
Don't we actually start building divisions at this point, though?
I can't
1940?
remember.
I thought we actually started increasing the strength of both the Navy and the... Well, I know the Marines got bigger.
Well, sure.
Because they were a couple regiments at best, and they went to 2 divisions fairly quickly, using those 2 regiments as corps,
Sure.
a cadre. But I mean, compared to European armies, the millions of men that are being thrown around, it still wasn't big.
No.
By any stretch of the imagination.
And again, within this whole aspect, again, it's an election year.
Mm-hmm.
You do not want to have a major event taking